I'm John Travis in Novato, California on the 22nd of July, 2020, talking to Gloria Elder in Atlanta, Georgia. Good to see you, Gloria. It's been a while.
Hi, it's great to see you, Jack, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of your project.
Yes, well, I want to find out more about who you are and why. It's
Mhm.
the why, the what we can provide with links on your in your narrative. But starting with where you were born, your parents, what they did, what your childhood was like, siblings, the early influences that shape us that we don't even necessarily remember, except in looking back. So take it away.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Gloria Laverne Smith Elder, and I am a spiritual being having a human experience on this earth plane. I was born in Noonan, Georgia, which is about 35 miles south of Atlanta. And I was born to the wonderful parents of Lovely, my father, and Gertrude Knowles Smith. I am the third child of that family of six children that were born to Lovely and Gertrude Smith. And I grew up on a farm in
Mm.
Noonan, Georgia, that was owned and still exists by my grandfather and grandmother, Laura
Wow.
Smith and Margaret Smith. In fact, Margaret Smith brought me into the world. Laura and Margaret Smith acquired about 350 acres of land, and they owned that land by the time they were both 49 years old. They were entrepreneurs. They had a big farm. I lived on that land all of my life and still go there often because
Mm.
that is where I really become grounded and reconnected to who I am and where I came from. My childhood was glorious.
Well, as
Uh,
good name befits. A
Absolutely, really and truly.
lot in a
I
name.
had grandparents who loved me unconditionally.
Mm.
And my favorite time of year was always the summer because my parents worked and they went off to Atlanta to work. My parents worked in Noonan, Georgia. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia. So they drove back and forth to Atlanta daily for their work. And my grandparents were the people that you could just go to. They called it the big house.
Hmm.
And you could go up, no, they called it the home house. And you could always go to the home house and hang out with your grandparents. And there was always lots of things to do and things that you thought that the ordinary person would have thought was hard work. But my grandparents worked very hard. They planted cotton. They had huge gardens. And my grandmother was the one who actually did all of the work in the house, and my grandfather did all the work in the fields. So, as a young child, I always wanted to do all of that. So I would always get my grandfather to let me go with him to the field and do things. And my grandmother would say, no, you have to stay home with me today because we're going to peel peaches and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And why can't I go with Papa? Da, 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 da. But with that, just really understanding who I was and where I came from my grandparents. My
Mm.
grandparents told stories, they were storytellers, and my grandfather was a master storyteller, Laura Smith. And Laura Smith was the one who worked from sun up to sundown, and he had a work ethic that I think a lot of his grandchildren actually took on that work ethic because of the teachings that they came from. In my family, switching back to my family, my mother and father were the first to get married of the 14 children that my grandmother and grandfather had. And
Wow.
so they ended up living with my grandparents early on. And
Was your father the oldest of those 14 then? Or?
no. My father was probably around the sixth child born.
Oh, but he
My
still managed
father
to get married
was,
first.
yes, he was the one who was the outgoing one, who
Oh,
was doing things out of the ordinary, or he was not that one who stayed and worked the farm and did those kinds of things. He explained that he had that experience when he was a young boy, when his older brothers were called to go to the war, World War II, and he could not go because he was the one who my grandparents chose to stay and help work the farm with my grandfather. And he chose not to do that once the farmland began to kind of like take its own course. And over the years, after the 50s, you know, farmers' land and farming began to, you know, take back seat to what was happening in the industry of farming. So my dad actually became a truck driver, and he drove trucks across the country. And my mother was a nurse, and my mother was also an administrator for hospital associations. Mm. And when we got old enough to stay home, that's what we did. We stayed at home, and we were supposed to be doing all the things that my parents told us to do or showed us how to do. Of course, some of those things got done and some of those didn't. But I was the middle child. I was born number 3. Mm-hmm. Now, you must understand this. My mother, and I say my mother, but my mother and father were rolling stones. My mother had 5 children in 4 years, 11 months, and 2 weeks. So we were stair steps. And being the first to get married, my grandfather, who was an entrepreneur and he could do all these things with his hands, built my mother and father a house on the land. So that was the first house on the land. And as we got older, of course, that house looked so small. But my father, being the businessman that he was and wanting more, he always wanted more. He said, you know, we're going to build a house. We're going to build our own house because we've outgrown this little shack. And so little did I know, Jack, that my father, that meant for us is if you worked, you had to put your money in the pot to help get this house built. And so little jobs that I would get in the summer as I became 11, 12 years old were things like babysitting. Sometimes my grandmother would give me little things. A grandfather would give me little money if I decided that I wanted to go to the field and say, Papa, I need to make some money. He said, well, why don't you get a sack and just come in and put some cotton in the sack for me? And I said, Big Papa, that's hard work. He said, yeah, it is. He said, but you can do it. And so I would have to take that money home on Friday nights. And we had this wonderful ritual every Friday night. You couldn't, if you got a check, you couldn't cash it. If you had money, you had to put it aside. So when my dad called the meeting together, everybody had to throw their money on the bed and we counted it. And as we got to be 15 and 16, we had to balance the checkbook. So everybody had a chance to write checks as they became 16. Now you can imagine a child being 16, 15, 14, 13, 12. And everybody is looking forward to the time when they can write checks. So my oldest brother started that. And that was another learning experience. My father teaching us how to be responsible, to also take time to count what you have and balance what you have so that you will know how much you have and how much you're going to be spending. So these were lessons learned from my dad. And my mother was a seamstress as well. So my parents always worked more than one job. Although my father was a truck driver, he drove trucks across the country as well as locally in Atlanta. On Friday nights, he would come home, he would get a bath, he would get his meal, and he would go straight to a barber shop and he would work. He was a barber. So he would cut hair Friday night and all day Saturday.
Mm.
And my mother was a seamstress. So on her off time, she made clothes for different people. And I'll never forget, my mother was hired by the high school, and it was the white high school in our community in downtown Noonan. And they wanted my mother to make the flag girls and the flag corps uniforms. So she said yes. She was good at what she did. In fact, she was a seamstress and a tailor. She made men's suits as well. So my mother said yes. Now, of course, everything we did as a family, everybody had to help out. So my brothers and myself became the people who would cut all of these patterns. Now, these uniforms had 5 pieces. So I'm saying, I don't know why my mother took this job, because this is a lot of work, but she did it. And it was a beautiful, all the young girls were so happy to get their uniforms, and my mother went to have all of them taken care of, make sure they were fitting right. So you see, I came from a family with heavy work ethics. And
Were you the only girl?
I was the only girl until my mother and father decided to have, 8 years after my baby brother was born, they decided to have another baby.
Uh-huh. And that was a girl.
Yes, and it was a girl. I had that premonition that it might not be somebody I wanted, because I was ruling the roost. I could tell my brothers what to do and they would do it. I mean, but they loved me. Whatever I said, they did. And if they didn't do it, I would do things like, okay, if you're not going to help clean up, I'm not going to cook your dinner. I'm not cooking until you clean up. Because I had learned how to cook at the age of 9.
Mm.
So my baby sister came into this world, and initially I said, why are you having another baby? We don't need any more children in this household. But when I saw her, Jack, she was the prettiest thing I'd ever seen. And she became mine at the age of 10. And the family would say, there goes Vern. My name is Gloria Laverne. I needed to say, my family calls me Vern. So they would say, there goes Vern, and my baby sister's name was Eloise. There goes Vern and Eloise down the street again, and she's changed her clothes again, and she's changed her hairstyle. So she became my little doll, and that was my baby sister.
Now you
So
were
you
also
see,
building a new house. Was that at this period of time? You said your dad wanted to build a bigger house?
yes, my dad, we got together, we built this house. All of us helped. We had a spring down the hill from the house, freshwater spring, where we initially began to get our water. So we had to carry buckets of water up the hill, not a high hill, but we had to carry the buckets of water from the spring to the house to help with some of the builders. I'll never forget Mr. Jack Russell was his name. And we had to help him during the day while my father did. And when we built that house, Jack, we were so happy and proud. It was not just something my mother and father did alone, that we all helped to do it.
Mm.
So we built this house, and to this day, that house stands.
Mm. So now, what about school? And you were a little mom with your kid sister. But
Yes.
what schooling experiences did you have? And
Well, of course, I graduated from high school, and was always involved in everything, and very busy. So I outgrew my baby sister. And of course, by that time, she was telling my mom and dad what to do. I went off to college. And I must say that college was never an option for me not to go. I grew up in a family who actually believed that the women should be educated. Everybody should be educated, but the women had no choice.
Mm-hmm.
that the women were going to be formally educated. And you knew that from a young child, from your grandmother and grandfather and your aunts and uncles telling you, and from your parents preparing you. So I ended up going to Spelman College. And at the time, Jack, I didn't know that I had two grandfathers. Both my grandparents were PKs. They were preachers' kids. And both my grandfather and grandmother went to school. Both my grandfathers on my grandmother and grandfather's side went to Morehouse College. And they went to school with W.E.B. Du Bois. And so I didn't realize that that was a family tradition. And my grandfather's sister went to Spelman. As it turned out, I graduated from Spelman and got my master's degree from Atlanta University. And little did I know that there were 9 women in my family who actually went to Spelman.
Mm.
And right
After
now,
you or before you or?
before me.
Uh-huh.
No, about 5, 6 before me, and then there were 5 before me, and 5 in my generation.
Now, for our viewers' sake who may not know much about Spelman, give us a little background.
Okay, Spelman College is an all-women's school in Atlanta, Georgia,
Uh-huh.
and it's ranked as one of the highest and well-known colleges for Black women in the country.
Uh-huh.
Spelman College was started in 1918 and by 2 women from the New England states, and Sophie Packard and Harriet Giles. And they started the school just for African American women. And from there, the tradition has gone on, and Spelman still stands as the #1 female school, African American female school in the country.
I thought most of the all-women schools integrated with boys, like Vassar and so forth. It didn't?
Never did. And Morehouse was our brother's school, of course. So we're right across the street from one another.
Oh, okay.
So you got that, you could get that relationship going there.
Like Harvard and Radcliffe.
Yes, exactly. So there was always that. So
Uh-huh.
that was my former education.
What year did you graduate from Spelman?
I graduated in 1971.
Uh-huh.
And of course, I started as we were in the middle of the civil rights movement.
Yeah, how was that?
Yes, that was amazing, and it was exciting, and it was high time, because during that time, young girls who were going and entering Spelman were just being introduced to our true Blackness, and to be proud, Black and we're proud, That was the time when James Brown was beginning to come out with "Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm proud." So my parents took me off and carted me off to Spelman in 1967. And we began to join things like the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, of which John Lewis, who recently passed away, was the head of. So we began to take part in the movements. And I remember being a part of sit-ins and walks that were protesting, going into stores like Rich's department stores, where we were saying you got to hire more Black clerks and that kind of thing. But during that time, I can remember everybody was feeling proud about who they were. Young girls who we went in with straight hair and say dyed and fried and combed to the side, and 2 weeks later, everybody had afros. I mean, everybody wanted to look like Angela Davis with a big bush, that kind of thing. And we participated in lots of the movement. In fact, my president at the time, President Albert Manley, when we graduated, President Albert Manley coined my class as the revolutionary class.
Mm-hmm.
That because we decided to change tradition. We weren't going to chapel Vesper every morning anymore at 7 o'clock. There's no more of that. So we protested. We locked the trustees in the building and sat in and all these wonderful things that you do when you're young. And, this was exciting times. And in 1968, Martin Luther King was shot, and that was a really a very heartfelt thing. So a lot of us volunteered to do things in honor of his family. So I volunteered to do lots of things, like go over to the King's house and answer the telephone. And I would never forget, Jack, the thing that I was so excited about is I could stand at his casket that lay in wait in our sister's chapel, Spelman Sisters Chapel, as people filed by and looked at it, and just get all of the up close experiences with Harry Belafonte, Diana Ross, you name it, just would come to and look, just in his honor and just observe his casket. So it was a good time. Spelman was one of the best times of my life.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, were you involved in any violence at that point, or how was your safety?
The safety was good. We were in a safety. Spelman always wanted to keep their women safe. So they advised us on things that we should and should not be involved in. So I was never involved in any violence at all.
Mm-hmm. That's good. I only yesterday saw a video describing Dr. King's assassination and how it was all set up by, it was all an inside job with the sheriff's department. And I knew the Kennedy assassinations were rigged. I hadn't known the specifics of that. So I don't think most people do. But anyway, you graduated from Spelman and you got your master's. What was the topic?
At Atlanta University, which was next door. Now I majored in sociology, criminology, because my parents said, well, why don't you become a lawyer? And of course I said, I don't know, sure. And, but my parents thought that I was very talkative and you always got something to say, you always got all these questions. So I was gonna go to University of California, Berkeley, and get my degree in law. And as it happened, as life would have it, my senior year, I was run over by a car on the expressway, dragged down the expressway for about 12 feet down under somebody's car. But I walked away with nothing but a couple of shin burns and that kind of thing. And my grandmother called me in the hospital and said, sweetheart, baby, you got a whole lot of more work to do for the Lord. So you just get ready. You ain't going nowhere. And of course, I was able to get through that and get over that. And I was able to walk and graduate, because this was 2 months before my actual graduation date. And my dad had given me a car. And this Volkswagen had a flat tire. It's just a story that kind of, put me in a position where the guy just runs up on the median and trying to get out of the way of another car, because I'm in the inside median, and he comes up 2 tires on the median and 2 tires on the expressway, and I couldn't get out of the way because this gentleman with the fire chief saw it, and he was helping me to move over to the other lane. He was going to drive the car over to the outside median. And all of a sudden, I just hear this screech, just as I had stood on the median, inside median. And I looked up and I saw this car coming towards me. But the thing that stunned me was there was a kid standing up on the front seat of that car. And I was like, what is that baby doing there? And couldn't get out of the way. But it was an experience that helped me to understand that I had a whole lot more work to do, and that I needed to, keep it moving. So at that point, I had grown to understand and that, you know, going on to get my master's and not leaving town is what my dad asked me not to do at that point. And he started to use reasons like, well, you know, you can't, you can see me overnight, but you can't, I can't get you home overnight if you're going to go away to California. I says, okay, fine. And so I was hanging out at home, and I had an apartment with a girlfriend, but I was still dependent on my family. So guess what? They were kind of giving me money to survive. And one day my dad said, sweetheart, listen, I am not going to continue to take care of you. Now you got two choices. You can go get your degree, a master's degree, or you can find a job. I was like, oh God, no, okay. I said, no problem. You know, at that age, you're invincible. So he's like, hey, you know, I can handle this. And so I went and my girlfriend and I, who were not working, we decided we were going to go look for jobs. And I landed an interview in a low-income community. And it was a Spelman College project to start a daycare center. And the lady who interviewed me hired me with no background in early childhood education, except that I grew up under my grandmother's feet, who actually helped allowed me to be her assistant teacher in the little red schoolhouse she created for her grandchildren in the summer. And so I told her I'd had that experience and then I had raised my baby sister. So she hired me. She believed in me. And I got in that daycare center, Jack, and it was just like my second nature to take care of children and to entertain them and to teach them new things. I mean, it was right where I was really supposed to be. And the director said, you know what, you're good at this. If you would like to get your degree in education, early childhood education, I will allow you to do that while you work here. Mm. She gave me an offer I couldn't refuse. So I said, okay, fine, that sounds good. And that's what I did. I worked and I went to school. And the kicker was I had to go back to Spelman to get my undergraduate courses in what? Education. Mm-hmm. So I was able to do that. And then I was able to go right into Atlanta University and get my degree in early childhood education. And I worked in that daycare center for 17 years. I did everything from, I went in as a teacher. I moved up to the social worker, to the parent coordinator, to the chief cook and bottle washer. I left there as the director of the early childhood education program, where I started programs in stress education. And I worked with parents because we had young parents. And I did everything from taking children to get their physicals, get their teeth done, to taking children home when their parents wouldn't pick them up on time and I needed to go to my house. And I just took the children with me. And the parents, I leave the parents a note on the door says, if you want to come get them, you can come and get them. If not, I'll bring them back to school in the morning.
Oh, wow. How often did that happen?
It's not very often, but it did happen. It happened. Yeah.
So now, in that period of time, did you have any relationships, or you?
Yes, I did.
I can't imagine.
Any relationships?
Yeah.
Of course, I had boyfriends along the way. In fact, I got married and stayed married for a hot minute and decided that was just not for me. I wasn't really ready. And so I became single again. And during that time, I met another person, and I was looking for a place to hold a daycare conference, of which I had become the president of the Title 20 program for daycare associations in Atlanta, which were about 12 of us. And I had become president that year, and I wanted to have a place to hold a program for these women. And so someone told me to go to the Atlanta Civic Center and ask the director there, because if you found someplace that was under the city's jurisdiction, you didn't have to pay.
Mm.
So I walked into this gentleman's office and that I had made plans for and to meet, and he right away stood up, his ears started flapping, he started smiling and said, "Hello, my name is," and it was my husband.
His ears flap, huh?
Yeah.
I like to see that. That's how you
And
do.
so we courted, and we eventually got married, and I'm married to that gentleman today.
Uh-huh. How many years does that make?
Oh, that's about 37 years.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And do his ears still flap?
Yes.
Oh, good.
In fact,
Any,
he now tells that story.
and any kids?
We have one daughter and one grandson.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So
My
the large.
grandson is 8 now. He's 8 now.
Uh-huh.
Uh-huh.
So from the daycare center, it sounds like you and Jenny must have been on parallel paths with stress reduction. And I know the two of you have been together a long time, but does she come into the picture around now, or?
Yes, she came in the picture around 1987, 86, 87. Jenny was launching her business, which was called the Holistic Stress Control Institute. And she was doing talks at various community facilities. And she invited the Daycare Directors Association to come and listen to her presentation, because she was telling people about stress and what she'd done, because at that time she'd already been funded to do programming for the Missing and Murdered Children's Crisis. And she had pulled out of that as the Missing and Murdered Children's Crisis kind of subsided. And she was starting her own business. But I just, generally met her, and coming and going. I just knew of her in the community. Mm-hmm. But one day, I said to my boss, it's time for me to move on. I've done everything I could do in the daycare center. So I'd like to, look for another job. I was giving her a heads up. And so she kind of looked at me, kind of first in disbelief, but then she said, well, okay. I don't think she really believed that, I was leaving. We had become very close. And so one day I decided that I was going to stay home. So I told my staff, I says, if anybody calls me, give them the phone number at home. I'm taking off for today. I need a, mental health day. And sure enough, Jenny called. And she said, your name has been recommended, because I understand that you work with children, you've written programs for children. And at that time, I had a program that I'd written called the Daycare Education for Children ages 2 to 5 years of age. And it was an open education program where I had developed an open education model, other than having teachers actually teach children, right, small groups of children. I open it up so the teachers and the children would be all together, and they could see the importance of younger children working with older children and this kind of thing. So I've done that. And so Jenny said, yes, I recommend. I says, well, thank you. I says, I would like to apply. So she said, yeah, tell me, where can we meet? And I says, well, I'll tell you what I do on the weekends. So I was teaching health and wellness. I've always done things to move my body. So I was teaching health and wellness at the Butler Street YMCA, which was downtown Atlanta, on Saturday mornings. And so Jenny said, oh, great. Well, I'm upstairs at the same time taking an African dance class. So that's where we met. You know when you're in sync, right?
Yeah.
So that's where we met. And Jenny just took the application. She didn't say anything except, great to meet you. You got the job, and meet me such and such a place at such and such a time. And the rest is history. We've been together ever since.
I just realized the viewers may not realize we're talking about Jenny Trotter, who I've also interviewed, and her link will be near yours, so you can fill people in. And how long, that was 86, you said,
That
or
was 1987, 88.
87, 88? Yeah. Yeah, when I met the two of you at National Wellness, it was like I could sense the chemistry, and you both would light me up. It was like always the high point at National Wellness to find you two.
Hmm.
I remember Jenny coming up behind me and laughing, and I knew from the laugh who it was behind me in the cafeteria. And then that time I was down in Atlanta for we were fighting circumcision at a conference, and that night we went over to another completely unrelated event, and there you are with Jenny. It's like, what? And I had just minutes before thought, wait a minute, Atlanta, Gloria lives here, and you show up. So it's another example of the magicalness of your existence in my
Yeah.
life. So,
Yes.
so, so you started working with holistic stress reduction.
Yes. And we were actually had this huge grant that Jenny had written, and it was to develop a program for preschoolers in stress.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, at the time, there were no programs for preschoolers in stress. Teachers would say, stress, children don't have stress. You know, they don't have a job. You know, why do these children have stress? And so, of course, soon they learned, you know, that children do have stress because children have feelings just like adults.
Mm-hmm.
They may not be able to express their feelings the same as adults, but they have feelings, and we have to help them to understand that all of their feelings are okay to have. Your feelings aren't right or wrong, they just are. But there are some things that you must not do. You must not hurt yourself and other people when you have stress. And here are some things that you can do to help yourself feel better. So we developed this 6-lesson curriculum that included supplemental materials such as puppets, puppet videos, songs. I mean, we rolled on this project.
Mm-hmm.
And this program is still in need of today. People still need this kind of work and training for preschoolers today. And it had components for adults. We taught teachers about stress. We taught parents about stress. We had curriculums for both of them. And we also taught teachers how to teach the stress curriculum in the classroom. So we had some great times with the Preschool Stress Relief Project. And from there, more grants. We started writing grants all over the place. And thus, Holistic Stress Control Institute grew and grew and grew.
And are you still associated, or have you retired from that?
My last day was February 28th, 2020, just before the COVID-19. I still am called upon. I still probably will do some consulting with them along the way. But I will always be able to teach stress education.
You're reminding me as a child, probably preschool age, that I used to be a hair twirler. I would twirl the top of my head till the hair came out and I had a bald spot. So I never thought of that as childhood stress. And in my family, only my mother was allowed to express feelings. So I learned to withhold anger. And of course, that showed up as depression, which has been my struggle through my life. But wish there'd been that kind of a program in Bluffton, Ohio in the 40s.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. We understand.
So what other sort of things? You're such a multidimensional person. Were you a wild dancer on weekends, or tell us some of your other pursuits that I'm sure there must have been.
I've always been very active. I love to dance. Even growing up in high school, I have a brother that's 11 months and 2 weeks younger than me. We would go to dances together and just dance. And as I grew older, the same thing happened in college, always at some dance. And along the way, I learned yoga um, from Richard Hittleman,
Mm-hmm.
the yogi. And he was teaching yoga at University of Georgia, which is about an hour and a half from Atlanta.
Oh, really?
And, but I could go in, I was living on the campus at Spelman in 1968, I'll never forget. And I would get up in the morning and I would go downstairs in the community room and turn on the TV, because you didn't have TVs everywhere during
Mm-hmm.
that time, but you had a TV in the community room downstairs. And I would go there and I would do exercises with him. He taught a class every morning. And pretty soon I decided that I must go to the University of Georgia. Now, you know, I called it forth and I met someone who was teaching a class, one class a week at University of Georgia. And this was after I graduated, because I kept up with him. I kept up with Richard Hittleman even after I went through Spelman. And I got a chance to meet him. I got a chance to be certified by him.
Mm.
And I became a yogini. And I started teaching yoga. And my first class was at the European Health Spa. Now, I don't know how many people remember the European Health Spa, but it was this one of the first health spas in Atlanta. And they had this big globe out front, this gentleman holding this big globe. And I wanted to teach more people yoga, so I started doing that. And as I told you earlier, and I also mixed in my yoga with my health and fitness class. And it was called Total Body Works. And my Total Body Works class that I was teaching at the Y included yoga and aerobics. So I was doing that. And later I began to learn other things to do that I liked, that was really very involved with movement. So I learned not only that, but Tai Chi. I love Tai Chi.
Mm-hmm.
I do Yang style, which is the 108 movements. I do those. And I just love it. I know my body was made to move, and I just love moving my body. At one time, you must understand too that I was a runner, and I used to run. But as I got older, I felt like that was just not what I needed to do. I needed to do something to work me from inside out. So I chose those quiet exercises, meditation, yoga, Tai Chi, and now I'm into Qigong, but I still blend in all of this. But my favorite exercise right now that I do is Spring Forest Qigong. And this is slow moving exercises that helps the body to heal. And it opens up energy blockages in the body, because everything is energy. And it helps you to open up any blockages in the body, because anywhere there's pain in the body, or there's a blockage. But that blockage can be opened just by moving the energy within and helping that to open up and begin to put the body in a healing process. And my Qigong master, Jun Yi Lin, has been my master since I met him at the National Wellness Conference, and it had to be back in 1993, 94.
Mm-hmm. Now, with arthritis, does that work as well?
Yes, it works perfectly for arthritis.
Interesting.
Yes, yes, it works for all kind of pain and sickness. It can open up blockages, it can heal. It's designed to heal the body.
It's interesting. Yesterday, I interviewed Roger Yankee, who you probably met at National Wellness too. And
Roger has been here lots of times.
Yeah, I hadn't realized I got the two of you back to back.
Yes. And I took yoga. I took classes from Roger before I met Master Lin.
Uh-huh.
We had him at Holistic Stress Control Institute several times. I don't know if you know, but a lot of people that we met at the National Wellness Institute, some kind of way, Jenny and us, we figured out a way to bring them, to introduce them to Atlanta and to our staff.
Yeah, yeah. Well, any other hidden talents, or not hidden, but ones that our viewers might be interested in knowing?
I am a writer and a storyteller.
Oh, that's right. The Storytellers of Georgia.
Yeah, I'm president this year and next year of the Coomba Storytellers of Georgia. I became interested in storytelling when I was a young girl sitting at the feet and the knee of my grandparents, especially my grandfather. And I wanted to know more about who I was and where I came from. So I asked a lot of questions. And I began to write those things down. I began to say, wow, Big Mama, Big Papa, I am going to write these stories about my family. And I am going to share this with everybody. And my grandmother got so excited. She started calling her friends on the phone and says, I'm going to be famous because my granddaughter going to write about me. And so now that I have written stories and told them on stage. That's what I do. I write stories and tell them on stage. My whole premise is the importance of grandparents being in the lives of their grandchildren. Mm-hmm. And to help them to understand a little bit more about who they are and where they came from. What I learned early with spending that time with my grandmothers and grandfathers on both my sides of the family, because I had grandparents on both sides of the family that were so loving. In fact, my grandparents used to fuss over who was going to get their 6 grandkids for the summer. But I digress. So I started writing those stories and telling them to other people. And I started telling stories also in my daycare center that would help children to relate and bring parents in and teach them those kinds of things. But the one thing that I did is that I started writing books about them, and I didn't know how it was going to turn out, Jack. I really didn't. I just said, gosh, I've told my grandmother, so I am committed. I says, I know, Big Mama, you are looking down on me and you're going to help me get this done, because she's helped me get so many wonderful creative projects together for the family. She was always pushing me to do things. So I say, to my I said to my family members, I say, do you know that grandparents are the bridge between the parents and the children? I says, because if I didn't have my grandparents to go to, I don't know what I would have done. I could tell them anything. I could say to them how I felt, and they always listened. They always listened before they gave you any advice. They never judged what you did. My grandfather, Big Papa, he would laugh at you if you got in trouble and got caught, because he had a coined phrase, Laura catches all meddlers. So if you got into trouble at his house, he would laugh and say, ha, 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 Laura catches all meddlers. So I'm writing stories about them, and I've become the family historian. So I'm gathering stories now, and it's so exciting at this time because I am really delving into the project. I'm gathering stories and writing and listening and recording stories from my from my aunts, my uncles, and from anybody who has stories about my grandparents. I go to the land and I sit on the pond that my grandmother and grandfather built, so we would have some place to go and hang out and have family reunions. So those are the kinds of things that I enjoy doing. My storytelling as a storyteller of Coomba Storytellers of Georgia, right now I'm actually looking at and working towards having more activity come into Coomba, having us being able to do more with storytelling for children, for families, for corporations, so that we will be able to write grants. So we got our first federal grant last month, first of the month. Yay for us. So this is catapulting Ka'umba into the realm of actually bringing in more people and telling more stories across the world. So it's an exciting time for me.
Do you have any videos on YouTube of you telling stories that I can link to?
I have, let's see, I have one story that I know is up, and it's on the wren's nest. The wren's nest,
Okay,
and
I'll
that
put a link to
is
that in.
in honor of the Joel Channel Harris stories about Brer Rabbit. But I told a story called Why the Sky is Far Away. And that story is about helping children and families to understand the importance of saving our planet.
Oh.
And so if you go to the wren's nest .org, storyteller-virtual, I think it'll pop up.
Okay.
But I'm on that. That's the latest one I've been on. I can't remember anything else.
Now, how far back have you traced your roots? Before your grandparents?
Yes, I've traced them back to my great-great-grandparents.
Mm.
And my grandparents, my great-grandparents, and my grandfather's mother. So my great-grandfather was, as I said, a minister. And I got a lot of information about him, and because he owned the land. He owned a lot of the land that my grandfather was able to acquire. That's a whole history and a whole story about that. So I'm looking forward to putting that in writing.
Mm.
And my grandfather, who also met his mother, and who told me when I asked him, Papa, as I got older, I started calling my Big Papa. I used to call him Big Papa as a little girl. I started calling him Papa as I got grown, because that's what the grown folks was calling him. So I called him Papa. And I said, Papa, you are my grandfather. Tell me about your grandmother. And Papa was very deliberate in his storytelling. He would always sit back and put his hand on his chin, and he'd think, and he'd look around, and he'd look up. And he said to me, looking me straight in the eye, you know, Grandma Henny was a low, black, nappy-headed woman who carried everything on her head. So my thoughts went straight to Africa, carried everything on her head.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I don't really know if she came from Africa. I know she came from the coast of Georgia and South Carolina. What I do know is that the ships from Sierra Leone that brought Africans into the Georgia, South Carolina coast were from Sierra Leone. So that's where I stopped. But my goal is to be able to be on Finding Your Roots with Henry Louis Gates Jr.
Mm-hmm.
That's my goal.
Well, and I'm sure you'll get it. So
that's what's driving me right now.
Uh-huh. Well, any other historical threads that I should know about that you want to share? Other sides of your multifaceted personality?
Well, I grew up with a city grandmother as well, who was the love of my life. People said that I was just like Miss Daisy. Her name was Daisy Bell Knowles.
Uh-huh.
And she was a tall, slender woman with beautiful long fingers and narrow feet. In fact, her feet were so narrow she could hardly find a pair of shoes in all of Noonan that could fit them. So the lady she worked for, Miss Johnson, drove her to Atlanta at the end of every season to buy shoes.
Huh.
That's the story I wrote called I Walked a Mile in Her Shoes, a story of unconditional love. I wrote that story about my grandmother because every Saturday afternoon, I would go to her house. When she got those new shoes, she wanted me to put them on to stretch them for her. That way they wouldn't hurt her feet. So that's the story that I wrote about my maternal grandmother. And that was a very exciting family. My mother was an only child, and she ended up marrying a man into a large family. She ended up having 6 children so very fast. Spiritually, I think my spiritual connections come from my roots. I've always, even though I grew up in the church and I had to grow up 2 churches. My mother was a Methodist and my daddy was Baptist. And they decided that they were not going to change their and go with one another. So that meant their children had to go to 2 churches. And I did. And I worked in both of those churches. And, but I always was connected to something greater than the religious side. And that was the spiritual side. I always knew that I was connected spiritually to something greater than myself. And I always was out seeking that. And I used to ask my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, I say, when I go to Sunday school, people tell me that I have to have a purpose in life. What is my purpose, Big Mama? And she looked me straight in the eye. She was very, very deliberate in when she spoke with you, to you. She would look you straight in the eye and she says, baby, that's easy. She says, you know what? You already have your purpose. Your purpose is to serve others. Therefore, you are serving God. And that's what I've been doing the rest of my life, all of my life. And that's what I will continue to do the rest of my life, is to help somebody, to serve somebody, to bring joy into people's lives, to laugh, to play, to plant, you know, to grow. I mean, I love seeing things grow. So that other side of me is that I plant things. I planted a garden because I had time to really nurture a garden for the first time. I've always planted flowers. So as I look out of my window today, I see sunflowers that are more than 6 feet tall, and the beautiful yellow blossoms are staring me in the face. That lets me know that I'm connected spiritually to something greater than myself. That's a miracle to see these things happen all around me, to sit outside before the sun comes up, to ground myself by walking on the grass in the morning while the dew is still there, to channel the sun energy into my body to balance me and to help me to grow even more. Those are the things that help me to know that I'm connected spiritually, and that these are the things that help me to be who I am and help me to actually stay connected to who I am and where I've come from.
Well, your accomplishment of your purpose in life was immediately evident the moment I met you. Our somewhat erratic but ongoing, 15 years that we've known each other. So well put. Now, for our viewers' sake, we're in the, I hope, the downslope of the COVID-19 epidemic. The media are hyping it up as it's getting worse and worse, though I'm not convinced of that. And also the Black Lives Matter movement has reached epic proportions. And I'd like to jump into the present time and get your thoughts on both of those and how it's affected you.
COVID-19, that's where I'll start. When it first happened, and when I really saw its effect, was probably at the end of March. Of course, we started shutting down Atlanta. Maybe around, I remember canceling my storytelling group the first Saturday in March, and saying we will not have an in-person meeting. And at first, I was really in a quandary about what is really going on, what's happening in our world. You know, we heard that it was already over in Japan and China, and of course, not thinking past that, we ended up getting it, and it became like blown, just full force in our face. We shut down. I didn't know how to feel about being shut down, but of course, I busied myself doing things that I enjoyed doing, because guess what? I had just retired, so I didn't have to worry about work. But I had this 3D puzzle of whales, and that I bought when I was on a nice little trip to South Carolina last year. And I said, oh, this is a good time to put together this 500-piece puzzle. And every day I would work on it and stay closely in, not going out, and deliberately, you know, doing my practices and meditating a lot more. But by the end of March, Jack, I was like, wow, I feel like I've been in forever. What is really happening? And so I started to get concerned about who would get it, how they would get it. But for myself, I always felt like I was healthy, that I would be okay, and that I wanted my family to be okay. So we started doing things that we needed to do, like masking up and making sure we went through all the rituals of taking clothes off and not coming in the house with shoes on, and da-da-da-da-da. So after a while, I said, you know, there's something that we need to be doing, Jack, if we want to change COVID-19. We need to be looking at who we are and what we are doing to affect change. So I decided that I was not living in the fear of COVID, that I am living, understanding and knowing that everything is all right, and that this may be a time where we could sit still and reflect and look at who we are, what we want to see happen in the world, and how we are going to take part in what we are doing in this world. So that's what I decided to do. As we moved forward, things started to open up. Still being precautious, I still felt like, boy, oh boy, I can go out, you know, as long as I'm protected, I'm around healthy people, it's okay. I'll be all right. We'll be all right. We are healthy. We are laughing. We are, you know, fun. We're not downtrodden. And that anything that I can do to help people to know and understand is that we must open up with love. We must open up with joy and peace in our hearts. We must begin to love ourselves unconditionally. And from that, it spreads out to everybody else. COVID-19 happened for a reason. I do believe that. But I also believe that we have to work on ourselves. This was a time to work on ourselves so that we could actually emanate what we want to see in the world and how we want to see change come. So as it moved towards us being able to get out, I started going out and I started doing the things I needed to do, gloves, that kind of thing. And one day I started to see things happen in the news that really shocked me, I guess, or hurt my heart. I wouldn't say shocked me, that hurt my heart. And it was when we began to see the racial unrest, when we saw people being hurt and being killed right in our TVs. And I felt like with that, there too was something to that. It meant that we had to do something, we had to say something. We can't just sit here and not say something and do something. So I agree that we have to work a little harder at being a little nicer, not just for ourselves, but for others. And that, sure, we actually know that if things keep rising up like racism and violence related to racism, that those wounds have not been healed. That's why they keep coming back.
Mm-hmm.
So it's now time for us to face up, fess up, and say, look, we need to be healed. And how can we heal? We're going to have to talk more to each other. We're going to have to be open to listen to what others have to say. And we have to be open to knowing that these things that we hold within, if we can't release them, they will fester in us and they will rise up again and again and again. So all of these things help me to realize that this is a time that we're in that we have to go through to get through. This too shall pass. And also that we can actually speed this up by being more loving, unconditional love, more caring, more supportive, and more giving to and of others.
Mm. Well said. Wow. Well, you've taken me on quite a trip here and really gotten to know who you are and why. And in wrapping up, what final, any additional words? That was a pretty good ending right there. But if you have any last words you want to share with our viewers, here's your chance.
Well, in closing, I'd just like to say to you, Jack, thank you for capturing my story. I hope that it will in some way inspire others to tell their story.
Mm-hmm.
And to open up to understanding that who I am and where I am and who we are and where we are in our lives is an honor to be in this space and to be alive here today. So I am honored and I say thank you.
And thank you. So I'll stop the recording now.